Hi, and welcome to this demo of flapfont, a very cool animated font that is based on the cubefont. And so basically it's very simple to use it. As with all animated fonts, what you want to do is you want to look for the controller comp. And when you open the controller comp, you're going to find a controller layer. And then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to show the effects panel. Sorry, you're going to want to show the effects controls, yes. And all the effects are pretty much self-explanatory, but I'll just walk you through them. Fade in time is basically how long it takes for the font to fade in. So let's go ahead and create a new comp. And flapfont, as with all our animated fonts, is designed to be used with characteristic. So you want to go ahead and open characteristic. And then we're going to go ahead and close the advanced here. We're just going to go ahead and select. You got to be careful that the comp you're working is not inside of one of the flap fonts. So you just want to make sure that that's outside. So then you select the flap font, and then you go ahead and hit set. And that sets the font in characteristic. And then we just type, this is flap font as a test. And then we just go ahead and hit create. It needs to select which composition you want to create it in. We'll go ahead and create it. And that's it. It automatically sets the type for you. So if we go here in time, let's go ahead and zoom out a little bit. So if we just go to the null controller and hit scale, we can just scale it down a little bit so it fits. And just open it up here, so we can see what's happening. So by default, it's going to just all happen at the same time, but we can go ahead and in the null that it just created, characteristic gives you these other sets of controls. So we'll go ahead and stagger frames for 3 frames. What that means is that the first letter will start, and then 3 frames later the second letter, and so on. And this is why I wanted to show you what the controller does. So we got to go back to flap. So we're working with flapfont 01, right? So there's 4 copies of them, and I'll explain why there's 4 copies. But because we're working here we had selected flapfont 01, we want to go to the flapfont 01 controller, and this is where we can change our settings. So if we change in the controller, we go ahead and say, for example, the fade in time, we want to make that 0. Then when we go back into our comp and we go back to 0, you can see that basically there is no fade in, right? The font is there all the time. So if we go back and we set it to say 5 frames, then when you basically see it fades in over 5 frames, each character as its offset. So that can make for a nice pleasing animation. If we go ahead and preview this. Okay, let's see what else we can control. Well, we have the color. Now, the color is sort of like the base color. You can then choose to have a gradient on top. So if you just want a flat color, just turn off the gradient, turn off use gradient, and it will just give you the color. Now, it also has a texture. So you want to set your texture opacity to 0, for example, if you want to just have this straight color. Of course, you can just set this to any color you want, and that will obviously set itself. Then we have contrast here. So contrast of 0 will give you an evenly lit, more evenly lit font. There's still going to be a little bit of contrast, and then 100% contrast. It's going to give you, much more contrast. So you can play with that. And then there's this texture option. So if you go into each one of these, there's going to be a texture replaced with a square texture. The only requirement is that the texture is square. So in this case, we have this Aurora texture. Doesn't have to be mirrored or anything. It just needs to be square. So once we go back to our controller and we select the texture opacity, if we go ahead and turn that up to 100, you'll see now that it applies that texture to the font. Of course, you can make this say 50%, and then it's going to combine whatever was below here. So in this case, it's just combining the color. But let's go ahead and go back to 0 opacity. If we turn on use gradient, then the gradient is being used instead of the flat color. And as you can see here, it's got these like blue and orange colors. Now you can also set what kind of a gradient. So for example, right now it's set to a linear gradient. but I can change it to a radial ramp, and you can see that now it's got a radial ramp. And you can actually change the sort of controllers of the beginning and end ramp, and you can just kind of move them around here in the comp, and you can kind of see what the different results are. So it's just kind of like a little fun thing to play with. And again, you can go back to the linear ramp and then also move those around and see, you know, some cool different options that you can get. And then, like I said, then the opacity sort of fades in from here, right? So depending on what you have, then the opacity of this texture is going to fade in on top. And then finally, completion time is how long the font takes to, by the way, you'll see when we come back here, it's the controller always updates the font. So that's why we have these 4 copies, because obviously, like, let's say we set this font like this, and then we wanted to have a second font with different options. Then you would go and choose flapfont 02. So you would here, for example, go, now I'm working with flapfont 02, and then I'm just, for example, I'm just type more here, and we'll go ahead and create. So I have to create the same composition. And now we have a second null in this comp that we can move around. We can just, and now you can see that this one looks like it has a little brick texture, because if we go to the flapfont 02 controller, you can see here that this one looks different. By default, there's just some different settings in the controller. But the main thing in this one is that there's a different texture. So if you go into the flapfont texture here, you can go ahead and just replace this. You can see, even though it's got the same name, it's actually a brick texture. So you can obviously go ahead and just say replace footage and replace file and replace it with whatever you want. We'll just leave it like this for now. But you know, you could put whatever texture you want. But the reason I wanted to show you this is how, by having the different flat fonts 01, 02, you can have like up to 4 different variations in the same comp, and then whatever you change here is going to change. So that is flapfont in a cinch. Use it with characteristic, and hope you enjoy playing with it.